The first time my boss Martin stole my idea and presented it as his own, I told myself it was a misunderstanding. The second time, I convinced myself it was just corporate politics. By the third time, I knew with absolute certainty this was war. And in war, the person with the most patience always wins. I still remember the exact moment I decided Martin Parker would regret the day he ever crossed me. It wasn't when he took credit for my market expansion strategy that saved Synergic Solutions millions. It wasn't even when he intercepted my promotion that I'd worked 80-hour weeks for 3 years to earn. No. It was the look in his eyes when I confronted him in the break room. That smug, dismissive glance that said, "What are you going to do about it?" He had no idea what I was capable of. None of them did. My name is Maya Nguyen, and this is the story of how I dismantled a corporate tyrant so methodically that he thanked me while I did it. Monday mornings at Synergic Solutions always felt the same. The stale smell of burnt coffee. The fluorescent lights that somehow made everyone look simultaneously tired and overworked. And the quiet desperation of another week beginning under Martin's reign of terror. But this particular Monday was different. This Monday, I arrived with a plan. I'd spent the weekend studying organizational psychology, corporate bylaws, and something I never thought I'd need, forensic accounting. I smiled at the receptionist, Diane, who looked surprised at my cheerfulness. If only she knew. "Someone's in a good mood," she said, handing me my security badge. "Just feeling optimistic," I replied, which wasn't a lie. I was extremely optimistic about watching Martin's career implode. The open plan office buzzed with Monday morning conversations as I made my way to my cubicle. I nodded at my colleagues, most of whom had also suffered under Martin's leadership at some point. Some had their ideas stolen like mine. Others had been publicly humiliated in meetings. A few had been passed over for promotions they deserved. All of them were potential allies, whether they knew it yet or not. I set my bag down and turned on my computer, the familiar startup tone now sounding like the beginning of a countdown. Martin wouldn't arrive for another hour. He always came in late on Mondays, claiming he had external meetings, which everyone knew meant he was sleeping off his weekend. That gave me exactly 58 minutes to set the first domino in motion. I opened my email and began composing a message to Linda Stevenson, our VP of Operations. Linda had always seemed fair, and rumors around the office suggested she wasn't particularly fond of Martin either. My email was carefully crafted, enthusiastic but not obvious, detailed but not suspicious. "Good morning, Linda. I've been working on some efficiency protocols for our department that I believe could reduce operational costs by 15% in the first quarter alone. I'd love to present these findings at the next departmental meeting. I've already discussed some preliminary ideas with Martin, who suggested I reach out to you directly. Looking forward to your thoughts." I hadn't discussed anything with Martin, of course, but he never read the meeting agendas until 5 minutes before, so he wouldn't know I was on the schedule until it was too late. And if he claimed he didn't approve it, he'd look out of touch with his own team. First trap set. I spent the next 40 minutes preparing my actual presentation, a masterpiece of data analysis that highlighted inefficiencies in our current system. Inefficiencies that, as my careful paper trail would show, had been implemented by Martin himself last year, costing the company an estimated $3.2 million. The sound of the main doors opening caught my attention. Martin had arrived early. I quickly minimized my screens and pulled up some standard reports as he strutted through the office, designer briefcase in hand, not bothering to greet anyone. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, and his custom suit probably cost more than my monthly rent. The visual disparity between his appearance and his character always struck me as appropriate. All packaging, no substance. "Team meeting in 5, he announced to the room without breaking stride, disappearing into his glass-walled office. I took a deep breath. This was unexpected but not problematic. In fact, it might even work better for Phase 1. The conference room filled quickly. Martin liked to keep people waiting, so I used the time to chat with Raj from IT, a quiet genius who had been with the company for over a decade and who, I suspected, had access to virtually every digital system in the building. "Hey Raj, how was your weekend?" I asked, sitting next to him. He looked surprised that I'd chosen to sit there. Fine, thanks. Just the usual, gaming and coding. I've been doing some coding myself, I said, lowering my voice slightly. Trying to automate some of my reporting processes. It's nothing fancy, but I'm stuck on a permissions issue. His eyes lit up slightly. Tech people love solving problems. What kind of permissions? I'm trying to access historical data from the project management system, pre-2022 stuff, but I keep hitting walls. Raj nodded thoughtfully. That's because Martin had the archives segmented after the reorganization, said it was for security, but it just makes everything harder to track. Is there any way around it? I asked innocently. Officially, you'd need VP-level approval. He glanced around and then added, unofficially, I could show you a workaround sometime. The system architecture is flawed, not that anyone listens to IT about these things. I smiled. I'd really appreciate that. Raj, maybe we could grab lunch this week? Before he could answer, Martin swept into the room, 20 minutes after his own announced meeting time. Let's make this quick. People, I've got a call with the executive team at 11. No one mentioned that the executive team was on a leadership retreat in Aspen this week and definitely not taking calls. Martin's lies were so common they had become background noise. The meeting proceeded as they always did, Martin talking about himself and his strategic vision while everyone else tried to look interested. I took meticulous notes, not of what he was saying, but of who looked the most disengaged, who checked their phones, who exchanged knowing glances. I was mapping out the landscape of discontent. When Martin finally opened the floor for team updates, I seized my opportunity. I've been analyzing our quarterly efficiency metrics, I began. Martin immediately cut me off. We don't have time for a deep dive into metrics today, just give us the headline. Of course, I said agreeably. The headline is that we're losing approximately $800,000 per quarter due to the implementation of Protocol XJ47. The room went silent. Protocol XJ47 was Martin's pride and joy, a workflow system he'd insisted on implementing against the advice of multiple team members. Martin's face flushed. That's impossible. XJ47 was projected to save us money. Projected. Yes, I said, sliding a single sheet of paper toward him. But the actual numbers tell a different story. I've prepared a comprehensive analysis if you'd like to review it, or I could summarize now. The sheet contained only the most damning statistics, enough to make him uncomfortable, but not enough to give him any real understanding of my full analysis. Martin glanced at the paper, his jaw tightening. Send me the full report. We'll discuss offline. Translation: we'll discuss this never. And I'll find a way to bury it. Actually, I said, I've already scheduled time to present these findings to Linda next week. She seemed very interested in understanding why we're seeing these losses despite last quarter's reorganization. The look on Martin's face was worth every late night I'd spent preparing this trap. He was cornered. If he tried to stop me from presenting to Linda, he'd look like he was hiding something. If he let me present, his failure would be exposed. Fine, he said tersely, but I want to review everything before that meeting. Absolutely, I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I'll send over what I have, though it's still a work in progress. What I didn't tell him was that the work in progress was designed to be confusing enough that he wouldn't be able to find the flaws in my argument without admitting he didn't understand the data. Martin's greatest weakness was his pride. He would never admit there was something he didn't comprehend. As the meeting wrapped up, I caught Zoe from accounting, giving me an appraising look. Zoe had been with the company even longer than Raj and had survived multiple reorganizations and management changes. She knew where all the financial bodies were buried, so to speak. I made a mental note to invite her for coffee later that week. Back at my desk, I received an email confirmation from Linda's assistant. My presentation was scheduled for next Thursday at 2 p.m. Martin was copied on the email, but didn't respond. He was probably trying to figure out how to undermine me without making himself look bad. Little did he know, that was impossible now. The game was already in motion. Over lunch, I casually mentioned to a few colleagues that I was concerned about some discrepancies I'd found in our reporting systems. I was vague enough that it didn't sound like gossip, but specific enough that it planted seeds of doubt. Corporate sabotage isn't about grand gestures. It's about creating 1,000 tiny cracks in someone's foundation until the whole thing collapses. By Wednesday, Raj and I had our lunch. In between discussions about the latest superhero movies and his impressive collection of mechanical keyboards, he showed me how to access the archived data. What he didn't realize was that I was memorizing his keystrokes, watching which systems he navigated through. You know, he said between bites of his sandwich, there's something weird about those old project files anyway. I tried to keep my voice casual. Weird how? Well, when we did the system migration last year, I noticed some of the budget allocations from Martin's department didn't match the executive approvals. Nothing major, just off by a few percentage points here and there. I nodded thoughtfully. Probably just rounding errors or something. Yeah, probably. Raj agreed, but I could tell he didn't believe that any more than I did. That night, I stayed late at the office. Most people were gone by 7 p.m., but I claimed I had a deadline to meet. Once the floor was empty, I used what Raj had shown me to access the historical project data. What I found wasn't just a smoking gun, it was an entire arsenal. For the past 3 years, Martin had been systematically misallocating resources, taking small amounts from various project budgets and routing them somewhere. The individual amounts were too small to raise flags, but together they totaled over $1.2 million. The question was, where had that money gone? I didn't need to prove he had stolen it, just that he had mismanaged it would be enough to sink him. But if I could show that he had personally benefited, that would be the corporate equivalent of a nuclear strike. Thursday morning, I arrived to find Martin hovering near my desk. Maya, he said with artificial cheerfulness, I've been looking at your analysis of Protocol XJ47. And I kept my face neutral. I think you've misinterpreted some of the data. The losses you're attributing to the protocol are actually due to market fluctuations beyond our control. I had anticipated this exact response. That's interesting, because I isolated market factors in my analysis. The losses persist even when controlling for external variables. Martin's smile tightened. Well, I'd like you to hold off on presenting to Linda until we've had a chance to align on the messaging. Translation: I want you to change your findings to make me look better. I understand your concern, I said, but Linda specifically asked for an unfiltered analysis. I wouldn't want to undermine her directive. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Maya, I'm not asking. This is about team cohesion. I met his gaze steadily. Of course, team first, which is why I've already shared my preliminary findings with the rest of the department for peer review. Transparency is key to cohesion, right? This was a bluff. I hadn't shared anything yet. But Martin had no way of knowing that, and he couldn't ask around without arousing suspicion. His face darkened. We'll continue this discussion later. As he walked away, I noticed Zoe watching our interaction with interest. I decided it was time for that coffee. The company cafe was busy enough to provide cover for our conversation, but not so loud that we couldn't hear each other. Zoe stirred her latte methodically as I explained what I'd found. I'm not surprised, she said finally. The numbers have never quite added up with Martin's projects. Have you ever mentioned this to anyone? I asked. She gave me a look that made me feel naive for asking. In this company, whistleblowers don't get protected, they get eliminated. Besides, I never had enough concrete evidence to make it worth the risk. What if I told you I might have that evidence? Zoe set down her spoon. I'd say you're either very brave or very foolish, possibly both. I'm neither, I replied. I'm just tired of watching him fail upward while the rest of us pay the price. She studied me for a long moment. What exactly are you planning, Maya? Justice, I said simply, or something like it. Zoe seemed to make a decision. The quarterly audit starts next week. If, hypothetically, someone wanted to highlight certain discrepancies, that would be the perfect time, especially if those discrepancies were presented in the standard audit format, making them impossible to ignore. I nodded, understanding what she was offering. Hypothetically, how would someone ensure those discrepancies were properly formatted? Zoe slid a thumb drive across the table so smoothly I almost missed it. Templates are public resources. Anyone could access them. I pocketed the drive. Thanks for the coffee chat, Zoe. It's nice to get to know my colleagues better. She smiled thinly. Careful, Maya. Martin didn't get where he is by playing fair. Neither will I thought, but didn't say aloud. When I returned to my desk, I had an email from Martin instructing me to cancel my presentation with Linda due to data integrity concerns. Attached was a revised analysis that essentially absolved his protocol of any blame, shifting it instead to market forces and implementation challenges at the team level. In other words, blaming the employees who had been forced to use his flawed system. I forwarded the email to my personal account, adding it to my growing collection of evidence. Then I wrote back, "Thanks for your input, Martin. I've incorporated your perspective into the presentation and have highlighted the areas where our analyses differ. This should give Linda a comprehensive view of the situation." His response was immediate and furious. "That is not what I asked you to do. Cancel the meeting. That's an order." Now I had him in writing, attempting to suppress information that could be relevant to company performance. Another piece of evidence for my collection. Instead of responding, I walked to Linda's office and requested 5 minutes of her time. Her assistant, looking surprised, ushered me in. Linda Stevenson was a formidable woman in her late 50s who had broken through numerous glass ceilings and had the scars to prove it. Her office was minimalist but elegant, with a single framed motto on the wall, "Clarity above all." "Maya," she said, not looking up from her computer immediately. "This is unexpected." "I apologize for the interruption," I said, "but I felt this couldn't wait. It's about tomorrow's presentation." That got her attention. She looked up, fixing me with an evaluative stare. "Go on." "I've been receiving some pressure to alter my findings or cancel the presentation altogether. I wanted to assure you that my analysis is data-driven and objective, despite any suggestions to the contrary you might hear." Linda leaned back in her chair. "From Martin, I presume?" I hesitated just long enough to appear reluctant. "I don't want to create any unnecessary tension." "Maya, in my experience, necessary tension is what drives organizations forward. Tell me what's happening." So I did. Not everything. Just enough to make it clear that Martin was attempting to suppress potentially important information about company performance. Linda listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. "Send me your complete analysis, the original one, not whatever revised version Martin is pushing. I want to review it before tomorrow's meeting." "Of course," I agreed, feeling a surge of triumph that I kept carefully hidden. "And Maya," she added as I turned to leave, "I appreciate your integrity. It's refreshingly rare." Back at my desk, I sent Linda my analysis, the real one, showing exactly how Martin's protocol had cost the company millions. Then I waited. Martin avoided me for the rest of the day, which suited me perfectly. I used the time to prepare for phase 2 of my plan, the audit revelation. Using Zoe's templates, I formatted my findings about Martin's budget misallocations to match standard audit documentation. The beauty of bureaucracy is that if something looks official enough, people rarely question its legitimacy. By the time I left the office that evening, everything was in place for the next day's presentation. Martin had sent 3 more emails attempting to bully me into compliance, each more desperate than the last. I saved them all and responded to none. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Friday dawned bright and clear, a perfect day for corporate execution. I dressed carefully in my most professional outfit, a charcoal gray suit that projected competence and confidence. Today wasn't about blending in, it was about being memorable. Martin was already in the office when I arrived, pacing near the conference room where my presentation with Linda was scheduled. When he saw me, he immediately approached, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Maya, a word," he said, gesturing to a nearby empty office. I glanced at my watch. "I'm sorry, but I'm due to meet with Linda in 20 minutes, and I still need to prepare." "This will only take a minute," he insisted, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. I followed him into the office, making sure to leave the door open. Whatever happened, I wanted witnesses. I thought I made myself clear, he said once we were inside, his voice low but intense. That presentation is not happening. I maintained a puzzled expression. I don't understand. The data shows significant issues with Protocol XJ47. As managers, don't we have a responsibility to address problems once we're aware of them? The problem, Martin hissed, is your interpretation of the data. You're undermining a system that the entire department has invested in. That you invested in, I corrected gently, against the recommendations of the implementation team, if I recall correctly. His eyes narrowed. Watch yourself, Maya. I've been in this business a long time. People who make waves tend to find themselves washed out to sea. Was he actually threatening me? This was better than I could have hoped for. Are you suggesting there would be professional consequences if I present accurate data to leadership? I asked, loudly enough that heads turned in the open office beyond the door. Martin realized his mistake too late. He forced a laugh. Of course not. I'm simply concerned about presenting incomplete analysis that might give the wrong impression. I share your concern for accuracy, I replied, which is why I've been so thorough in my research. In fact, Linda already has my complete analysis and has reviewed it ahead of our meeting. The color drained from Martin's face. You sent it to her directly, without my approval? She requested it specifically, I said, which was technically true, even if the request had come after my prompting. Before Martin could respond, Linda's assistant appeared in the doorway. Ms. Nguyen, Linda is ready for you now. Martin composed himself quickly. I'll be joining you for this meeting. The assistant looked uncomfortable. Actually, Mr. Parker. Linda asked to speak with Maya privately first. She said she'll call you in if needed. I couldn't have scripted it better myself. With a nod to Martin that I hoped conveyed appropriate professional sympathy, I followed the assistant to Linda's office. Linda was reviewing my analysis when I entered. She gestured for me to sit without looking up. This is concerning, she said finally. I agree, I replied, the financial implications alone. Not just the financial implications, she interrupted. The pattern here suggests a systematic issue with how projects are being evaluated and implemented in your department. I nodded soberly. That was my conclusion as well. Linda fixed me with a penetrating stare. Maya, how long have you been aware of these issues? This was a test. If I said I'd known for a long time, I'd appear complicit in the cover-up. If I said I'd just discovered it, I might seem incompetent for not catching it sooner. I've had concerns for several months, I said carefully. But it was only recently that I gained access to enough historical data to confirm my suspicions and quantify the impact. And what prompted this investigation? Professional responsibility, I said, meeting her gaze steadily. When I noticed discrepancies in our quarterly results, I felt obligated to identify the root cause. Linda nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. I've canceled the larger meeting. This needs to be addressed at a higher level first. I've scheduled time with the executive team for Monday morning. I'd like you to present these findings directly. My heart raced. This was moving even faster than I'd anticipated. Of course, should Martin be there as well? Martin will be otherwise engaged, Linda said cryptically. Now, is there anything else I should know before Monday? This was my opening. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder containing my audit-formatted documentation of Martin's budget misallocations. Actually, yes. While researching the protocol issues, I discovered some irregularities in historical budget allocations that may be relevant. Linda accepted the folder with a raised eyebrow. Irregularities? Possibly just administrative oversights, I said, maintaining plausible deniability. But given the pattern and amounts involved, I thought it warranted attention. She opened the folder and began reviewing its contents, her expression growing more serious with each page. When she looked up, there was a new respect in her eyes. This is extremely thorough work. Maya, perhaps you missed your calling in forensic accounting. I smiled modestly. I'm just detail-oriented, Indeed. She closed the folder. I'll need to bring our finance team into this immediately. In the meantime, I'd appreciate your discretion. Absolutely, I assured her. My only interest is in helping the company address these issues effectively. As I left Linda's office, I saw Martin watching from across the floor, his expression a mixture of anger and anxiety. I gave him a small, professional nod as I returned to my desk. Within an hour, Martin was called to an emergency meeting with Linda and the head of finance. He didn't return to the department for the rest of the day. By late afternoon, rumors were swirling. Administrative assistants from the executive floor reported closed-door meetings. It confirmed that Martin's system access had been limited. The signs of a corporate execution were all there. Raj stopped by my desk as I was preparing to leave. Whatever you did, he whispered. They've been pulling access logs for all of Martin's projects for the past 3 years. I feigned surprise. Really? I wonder what that's about. He gave me a look that said he wasn't fooled. Just be careful. Maya, when they start digging, they don't always stop where you want them to. His warning was valid, but I had covered my tracks meticulously. Every piece of information I'd used was technically accessible to someone at my level, even if finding it had required some creative navigation of our systems. Monday morning arrived with a tense electricity in the air. Martin's office was conspicuously empty, his assistant tight-lipped about his whereabouts. I dressed with particular care for my presentation to the executive team, arriving early to prepare the conference room. Linda met me outside the executive boardroom. Change of plans, she said quietly. We'll be meeting in the CEO's office instead. Just you, me, the CEO, and the CFO. This was unexpected. Meeting in the CEO's office suggested this had escalated beyond even what I had anticipated. Olivia Wright, Synergix's CEO, was a legendary figure in the industry, known for her strategic brilliance and uncompromising standards. Her corner office on the top floor overlooked the city, the wall of windows creating the impression that her domain extended to the horizon. She greeted me with a firm handshake. Ms. Nguyen, I've heard a lot about you in the last 48 hours. All good, I hope. I replied with more confidence than I felt. That remains to be seen, she said, but there was a hint of appreciation in her eyes. Linda tells me you've uncovered some significant issues. For the next hour, I presented my findings, first about Protocol XJ47 and its negative impact on company performance, then about the budget misallocations I had discovered. I was careful to present everything as facts without drawing explicit conclusions about Martin's intentions or competence. The CFO, a serious man named Harold Bishop, asked pointed questions about my methodology and sources. I answered each one directly, providing additional documentation where needed. When I finished, Olivia and Harold exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation. Thank you, Ms. Nguyen, Olivia said finally. This has been illuminating. I'd like you to work with Harold's team this week to ensure they have everything they need for their investigation. Of course, I agreed, happy to help in any way I can. As Linda walked me out, she kept her voice low. You've created quite a stir. Maya, Martin has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. I adopted an appropriately concerned expression. I hope I haven't created problems. I was just trying to address the issues I found. You did exactly what you should have done, Linda assured me. Integrity matters in this company. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked closely with the finance team, providing all the evidence I had collected and helping them understand the complex web of misallocations. Martin remained absent, his name gradually disappearing from meeting invites and project documentation, the corporate equivalent of being erased from history. The official announcement came on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after my initial presentation to Linda. Martin had decided to pursue other opportunities, effective immediately. The department would report to Linda temporarily while a replacement was sought. The office was buzzing with speculation, but I kept my head down, focusing on my work as if nothing unusual had happened. Inside, however, I was savoring every moment of vindication. Linda called me into her office that afternoon. Maya, I wanted to personally thank you for your diligence in this matter. The company has avoided significant potential damage because of your actions. I nodded modestly. I was just doing my job. You did considerably more than that, she countered. Which is why I'd like to discuss your future with Synergix. My pulse quickened. This was the moment I had been working toward, not just Martin's downfall, but my own advancement. As you know, Martin's position is now vacant. Normally, we would conduct an external search. But given the circumstances and your demonstrated capabilities, the executive team would like to consider you for the role. I allowed myself a small smile. I'm honored and definitely interested. Good, Linda said. There would be a formal interview process, of course, but consider this a strong endorsement of your candidacy. As I left her office, I felt eyes on me from around the department. News traveled fast in corporate environments. By tomorrow, everyone would know I was being groomed for Martin's position. I stopped by Zoe's desk on my way out. Thanks for the coffee chat a few weeks ago, I said casually. It was very enlightening. She gave me a knowing look. Always happy to discuss templates with colleagues. Congratulations, by the way. Well deserved. Raj caught me at the elevator. So, he said, Director of Operations by 30, impressive. Nothing's confirmed yet, I reminded him. It will be, he predicted. Just don't forget the little people when you're running the place, okay? I laughed, as if I could forget the person who controls all our systems. His expression turned serious. For what it's worth, Martin had it coming. The guy was toxic. But Maya. He hesitated. What is it, Raj? Just be careful you don't become what you destroyed. His words stayed with me during my commute home. Was that what this was about? Was I at risk of becoming another Martin? No, I decided. Martin had been motivated by greed and ego. I was motivated by justice. Wasn't I? The formal interviews for Martin's position took place over the following week. Though there were other candidates, it was clear from the questions and the atmosphere that I was the preferred choice. The announcement was made on a Friday afternoon. I would be taking over as Director of Operations, effective immediately. Congratulations poured in from colleagues, many of whom seemed genuinely happy for me. There were a few who regarded me with new wariness, perhaps wondering if I had orchestrated Martin's downfall deliberately. They weren't entirely wrong, but they weren't entirely right either. Martin had created his own vulnerabilities. I had simply exposed them. My first week as director was a whirlwind of meetings, strategy sessions, and administrative tasks. I made a point of consulting with team members about their projects and concerns, something Martin had rarely done. The contrast in styles was immediately apparent and appreciated. It was during my second week that I received the email. The sender was unfamiliar, but the subject line made my blood run cold. We should talk about Martin. The email contained no text, just an attachment. A screenshot of one of my early emails to Linda, with metadata showing it had been backdated to create the impression I had been planning Martin's downfall for months. I hadn't backdated anything. Of course, my evidence was genuine. But someone had access to my email and was trying to make it look like I had fabricated evidence against Martin. At the bottom of the screenshot was a phone number. No name, no explanation, just 10 digits. My hands shook as I deleted the email. This was a complication I hadn't anticipated. Someone was threatening me. But who? And what did they want? I spent a restless night considering my options. I could report the email to IT security, but that would mean admitting I'd received a threat related to Martin's departure. It might raise questions about my methods that I preferred to leave unasked. The next morning, I used a company phone rather than my personal one to call the number. I was wondering when you'd call. A familiar voice answered. It took me a moment to place it. Kevin Lee, Martin's former assistant. Kevin, I said, keeping my voice neutral. What's this about? I think you know, he replied. Martin was many things, but he wasn't stupid enough to misallocate funds without covering his tracks. Someone helped him hide those transactions. Someone who still works at Synergix. My mind raced. And you know who that is? Let's just say I have my suspicions. And so should you, considering your new position. Why are you telling me this? There was a pause. Because unlike Martin, you seem to care about doing the right thing. And because I have a conscience, even if no one at Synergix thinks assistants have those. What do you want, Kevin? Nothing. Consider this a friendly warning. Watch your back. Maya, not everyone congratulating you is on your side. He hung up before I could respond. I sat at my desk, mind whirling with this new information. If Kevin was right, someone at Synergix had helped Martin hide his financial misconduct, and that person was still here, potentially working to undermine me. The question was, who? And how could I find out without alerting them to my suspicions? I spent the next few days observing my colleagues with new eyes, looking for signs of duplicity or unusual interest in my activities. Nothing obvious stood out, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. During a routine budget meeting with the finance team, I casually brought up the audit findings that had implicated Martin. I've been reviewing the documentation, I said, and I'm curious about something. Would it have been possible for Martin to implement these misallocations without assistance from someone in finance? Harold, the CFO, looked thoughtful. Highly unlikely. Our system has too many checks and balances. He would have needed someone with higher-level access to approve or disguise the transactions. Someone like who? I pressed. Harold hesitated. That's part of our ongoing investigation. We're conducting a thorough review of all approvals during the relevant time period. After the meeting, Harold asked me to stay behind. Once we were alone, he closed the door. Maya, I appreciate your interest in resolving this situation completely, but I need to caution you against conducting your own investigation. I maintained an innocent expression. I'm just trying to understand the systems better now that I'm in this role. Harold wasn't fooled. You've done the company a service by bringing these issues to light, but digging further could be politically complicated. Some of the approvals we're investigating came from very high up in the organization. My heart raced. How high? He gave me a meaningful look. Let's just say that not everyone in the executive suite is pleased with the direction of our audit. This was bigger than I had realized. If Martin had protection at the executive level, his misdeeds might be just the tip of the iceberg. I understand, I said carefully. I'll focus on my new responsibilities. Harold seemed relieved. Good. You have a promising future here. Maya, don't jeopardize it by looking for conspiracies. But it wasn't a conspiracy if it was real. And now I was certain it was real. I decided to approach the problem from another angle. If someone high up had helped Martin hide his financial misconduct, there would be electronic traces somewhere. And I knew just the person who might be able to find them. Raj looked surprised when I invited him to lunch at an upscale restaurant 2 blocks from the office. Is this a director thing? He joked, as we were seated at a secluded corner table. Taking your favorite IT guy to fancy lunches? I smiled. Consider it a thank you for all your help over the years, and maybe a preemptive thanks for future help. His expression turned wary. What kind of future help are we talking about? I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Hypothetically, if someone wanted to trace approval pathways for financial transactions from 3 years ago, how would they do that? Raj's eyes widened. Hypothetically, they wouldn't. Those records are archived on secure servers with extremely limited access. Even I couldn't get to them without leaving digital fingerprints all over the place. But they do exist? He nodded reluctantly. Everything exists somewhere in the system. But Maya, this sounds dangerously close to the kind of digging that gets people fired. Or worse. I'm not asking you to do anything, I assured him quickly. I'm just trying to understand the landscape. The landscape? Raj repeated skeptically. Right. He took a sip of his water, thinking. Look, I can't help you access those records, but I can tell you who could have authorized them in the first place. Any financial transaction over $50,000, requires approval from either the CFO or the Chief Strategy Officer. Harold or Vincent, I murmured. Right. And since Harold is the one leading the investigation, it points to Vincent, I finished. Vincent Zhao, the Chief Strategy Officer, had always been something of an enigma at Synergix. He rarely interacted with anyone below the executive level, and his strategic initiatives often seemed disconnected from the company's day-to-day operations. I'd only met him once, briefly, during a company-wide event. This is all hypothetical. Of course, Raj added hastily. Of course, I agreed. Purely educational. Back at the office, I began researching Vincent more thoroughly. His background was impressive. Harvard MBA, successful stints at several Fortune 500 companies, recruited to Synergix 5 years ago to oversee strategic growth. On paper, he was exactly what you'd expect for someone in his position. But as I dug deeper into public records and company announcements, I noticed something odd. Several of the companies Vincent had worked for previously had experienced financial scandals shortly after his departure. Nothing that implicated him directly. He was always gone before any investigations began. But the pattern was suspicious. I needed more information, but I had to be careful. If Vincent was indeed Martin's protector, and if he suspected I was investigating him, my newfound position would be the least of what I might lose. The opportunity presented itself unexpectedly during an executive strategy session the following week. As the newest director, I was invited to present my department's quarterly goals. Vincent was present, watching me with polite interest as I outlined my plans. After the meeting, he approached me. Impressive presentation, Maya. Your promotion was well-deserved. Thank you, I replied, studying him closely. Vincent was in his mid-50s, immaculately dressed, with an aura of absolute confidence. Nothing in his manner suggested he saw me as anything but a promising new director. I particularly liked your emphasis on transparency in project reporting, he continued. After the irregularities with your predecessor, it's refreshing. Was he testing me? I maintained a neutral expression. I believe clear communication is essential for effective leadership. Indeed, he agreed. Perhaps we could discuss your ideas further sometime. My calendar is usually quite full, but I could make time next week. This was an unexpected opportunity. I'd be honored, I said. Vincent's assistant emailed me later that day with an invitation for lunch the following Wednesday at an exclusive restaurant known for its privacy and discretion. I accepted immediately. The week passed in a blur of meetings and strategy sessions as I settled into my new role. I was careful not to do anything that might alert Vincent to my suspicions, focusing instead on establishing myself as a competent and straightforward director. Wednesday arrived, and with it, my lunch with Vincent. The restaurant was even more exclusive than I had imagined. Private booths separated by frosted glass. Servers who appeared and disappeared with practiced invisibility. Vincent greeted me warmly, as if we were old colleagues rather than near strangers. Maya, thank you for making time. I know how hectic those first few weeks in a new position can be. I appreciate the invitation, I replied. It's not often a new director gets one-on-one time with the CSO. He waved a hand dismissively. Titles are just organizational conveniences. I prefer to think of us all as problem solvers with different areas of focus. The conversation remained professional and surprisingly pleasant throughout the first course. Vincent was charming and insightful, offering advice about navigating executive politics without being condescending. It was during the main course that he finally broached the subject I had been anticipating. I understand you were instrumental in identifying the issues with Martin's financial management, he said casually, as if discussing the weather. I nodded, watching him carefully. I noticed discrepancies in the data and felt obligated to report them. Very commendable, Vincent said, studying me. Though I must admit, I was surprised by the thoroughness of your investigation. Most people in your position would have stopped at identifying the protocol issues. I took a calculated risk. I believe in being thorough. Once I noticed one problem, it seemed prudent to look for others. Indeed. Vincent took a sip of his wine. And now that you've assumed Martin's role, do you plan to continue investigating past discrepancies. This was it, the moment of truth. I could back down, assure him that I was focused solely on moving forward, or I could signal that I intended to keep digging. I chose a middle path. My priority is ensuring my department runs efficiently and transparently. I think we've all learned valuable lessons from what happened with Martin. Vincent seemed to relax slightly. A wise approach. The past can be instructive, but dwelling on it rarely serves us well. He leaned forward slightly. Between us, Maya. Martin's situation was unfortunate, but not entirely of his own making. Oh, I kept my tone casual, though my heart was racing. Martin was ambitious, but ultimately a follower. He implemented strategies designed by others, even when they were less than optimal. Was Vincent actually suggesting that Martin had been a scapegoat? I'm not sure I understand, I said carefully. Vincent smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Simply that in organizations like ours, responsibility is often more distributed than it appears. Martin paid the price for systemic issues that extended beyond him. That's an interesting perspective, I said neutrally. It's something to keep in mind as you establish yourself in your new role. Vincent continued. Success at Synergix isn't just about performance, it's about understanding which battles to fight and which to avoid. The warning was clear, if elegantly delivered. Vincent was telling me to drop my investigation. I appreciate the advice, I said. It's always helpful to understand the broader context. The conversation shifted to safer topics for the remainder of the lunch. As we parted outside the restaurant, Vincent clasped my hand warmly. I've enjoyed our chat, Maya. I think you have a bright future at Synergix. I look forward to seeing how you develop in your new role. Translation: stay in your lane, and we won't have problems. I returned to the office with my suspicions confirmed. Vincent had almost certainly been Martin's protector. And now he was warning me away from further investigation. The question was, what was he hiding that was worth protecting Martin for? The answer came from an unexpected source the next day. Zoe appeared at my office door, closing it behind her without asking permission. We need to talk, she said without preamble. I gestured for her to sit. What's on your mind? She placed a folder on my desk. After our coffee chat, I started looking more closely at the audit trail for Martin's projects. I found something interesting. I opened the folder to find a series of financial reports, certain sections highlighted in yellow. These are capital allocation adjustments, Zoe explained, made quarterly for the past 3 years. On their own, they look routine, just standard adjustments to account for changing project needs. I scanned the documents, not immediately seeing the significance. And? Look at the pattern, Zoe said, pointing to the highlighted sections. Every quarter, exactly 2.7% of the budget for major infrastructure projects was reallocated to strategic contingencies. That's unusual. Contingency allocations are typically calculated based on risk assessments that vary by project. So someone was skimming a fixed percentage, I murmured. Exactly. And guess who oversees strategic contingency funds? Vincent Zhao, I said, the pieces falling into place. Zoe nodded. The funds were then distributed to various strategic initiatives, all legitimate looking on paper, but nearly impossible to audit effectively because they were classified as competitive intelligence operations. Meaning the details were restricted for security reasons, I concluded. Precisely. It's the perfect setup. Skim a small percentage from multiple large projects, funnel it into black box strategic initiatives, and no one can question the specifics without appearing to compromise company security. I looked up at Zoe. Why are you showing me this? This could get you fired, or worse. She met my gaze steadily. Because I've been at Synergix for 17 years, and I've watched executives like Vincent use this company as their personal piggy bank. Martin was just a mid-level operator in their system. If you're going after the real problem, I want to help. Her sincerity was convincing, but caution was still warranted. What exactly do you think I'm doing, Zoe? Please, she said with a hint of impatience. You took down Martin in 3 weeks with surgical precision. You're having private lunches with Vincent Zhao. You're either planning to join his network or dismantle it. I'm betting on the latter. I considered my options carefully. Having Zoe as an ally would be valuable, but only if I could trust her completely. These reports are compelling, I said finally, but not conclusive. We'd need to connect the strategic initiatives directly to Vincent's personal benefit to prove wrongdoing. I thought you might say that, Zoe replied with a small smile. She pulled a USB drive from her pocket and placed it next to the folder. This contains records of the supposedly confidential strategic initiatives. It took some creative accounting to access them, so I'd appreciate if you didn't ask how I got them. I stared at the drive. Why didn't you take this to Harold or Olivia yourself? Because Vincent has friends in high places, including on the board. A financial analyst making accusations against the CSO would be shut down immediately. But you, the director who already exposed one financial scandal and has Olivia's ear, you might actually be listened to. She was right, and we both knew it. I had political capital that Zoe lacked, but using it against someone as powerful as Vincent carried enormous risk. I'll need time to review these materials, I said, neither committing nor refusing. Zoe nodded, understanding the caution. Take all the time you need, but Maya, Vincent isn't the type to leave loose ends. Martin was expendable. You might not be. After she left, I stared at the USB drive, weighing my options. I had wanted justice when I went after Martin, but this was escalating into something far more dangerous. Vincent wasn't just a bad manager taking credit for others' work. If Zoe's information was accurate, he was orchestrating systematic fraud on a massive scale. I decided to examine the evidence before making any decisions. Using a non-networked laptop I kept for personal projects, I reviewed the files Zoe had provided. What I found was shocking even to my now cynical eyes. The strategic initiatives were largely shell operations. They had official documentation and minimal staffing, but produced nothing of actual value to Synergix. Instead, they contracted with a series of external consulting firms for specialized services. These firms, upon further research, all traced back to shell companies registered in tax havens, with ownership structures deliberately obscured. Someone had created an elaborate mechanism to extract millions from Synergix under the guise of legitimate strategic investments. And while I couldn't yet prove Vincent was the ultimate beneficiary, the circumstantial evidence was compelling. I needed more concrete proof before I could take this to Olivia or the board. And I needed to be extremely careful about how I obtained it. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Linda, ostensibly to discuss departmental reorganization. Once in her office with the door closed, I shared a carefully edited version of my concerns. I've been reviewing our strategic initiative partnerships, I began, and I'm having trouble understanding the value proposition for several of them. Since they impact my department's resource allocation, I was hoping you could provide some insight. Linda looked surprised. That's unusual. Strategic initiatives typically fall under Vincent's purview exclusively. What prompted this review? Just trying to optimize our operations, I said casually. Several of my team members are allocated to these initiatives, and I want to ensure we're deploying resources effectively. Linda studied me for a moment. Which initiatives specifically are you concerned about? I mentioned two of the shell operations I'd identified from Zoe's files. Linda's expression changed subtly, a tightening around the eyes that suggested recognition. Those are classified as competitive intelligence operations, she said carefully. The details are restricted. I understand the sensitivity, I assured her. I'm not asking for confidential information. I just need to know if these initiatives are expected to continue long-term so I can plan accordingly. Linda hesitated, then sighed. Maya, I appreciate your diligence, but my advice is to work around these allocations rather than questioning them directly. Is there a reason I shouldn't inquire about them? I pressed gently. Linda leaned forward, lowering her voice. Those particular initiatives have board-level visibility. Vincent presents updates on them quarterly. I see, I said. Though what I really saw was that the corruption potentially extended to the board itself. Thank you for the clarification. As I left Linda's office, my determination hardened. This wasn't just about Martin anymore, or even Vincent. This was about systematic corruption that was draining resources from the company and the honest employees who worked there. I spent the next 2 weeks building my case meticulously. Using Zoe's financial data as a starting point, I traced money flows, identified patterns, and documented inconsistencies. I was careful to access only information that I had legitimate reason to view in my new role, supplementing it with public records and industry knowledge. The picture that emerged was damning. Over 5 years, approximately $32 million had been diverted through the Strategic Initiative Program to the shell consulting firms. While I still couldn't definitively prove where the money ultimately went, I had established beyond reasonable doubt that the initiatives themselves were fraudulent. I compiled my findings into a comprehensive report, making sure every assertion was backed by verifiable evidence. Then I encrypted it and saved it in multiple secure locations, including sending a copy to my personal attorney with instructions to release it to federal regulators if anything happened to me. Paranoid, perhaps, but after what I'd uncovered, caution seemed prudent. The final question was who to trust with this information. Harold, as CFO, would be the logical choice. But his earlier warning to stop digging made me hesitant. Linda clearly knew something was amiss but seemed unwilling to challenge the status quo. That left Olivia, the CEO, unless she was complicit as well. I decided to take the risk. Olivia had a reputation for integrity, and as CEO, she had the most to lose if a massive fraud was exposed publicly. I requested a private meeting, citing urgent concerns about financial governance. To my surprise, her assistant scheduled me in for the very next morning. This was either very good or very bad. Either Olivia was taking my concerns seriously, or someone had alerted her to my investigation and she wanted to shut it down quickly. I arrived at Olivia's office with a secure tablet containing my report and a small printed executive summary. Nothing that could be intercepted electronically or left behind accidentally. Olivia greeted me with her customary directness. Maya, your meeting request was intriguing. What's this urgent concern? I took a deep breath. I've uncovered evidence of significant financial misconduct involving the Strategic Initiatives Program. I believe approximately $32 million has been misappropriated over the past 5 years through fraudulent consulting arrangements. To her credit, Olivia didn't dismiss me immediately. That's an extremely serious accusation. I assume you have evidence. I handed her the executive summary and unlocked the tablet. Everything is documented here. The transactions, the shell companies, the pattern of fund diversion, it's all verifiable through our own financial records and public registrations. Olivia spent 30 minutes reviewing the material in silence, her expression growing more grave with each passing minute. Finally, she set down the tablet and looked at me. You understand what you're implying here, she said. It wasn't a question. I do, I confirmed, and I've been very careful to verify every aspect of this report. Who else knows about this? No one has seen this report, I said truthfully. Though Zoe obviously knew some of the underlying information, Olivia was silent for a long moment, seemingly weighing her options. Maya, I need to address this at the highest level. This information doesn't leave this room for now. Not a word to anyone, not your team, not Linda, not Harold, no one. Understood? I nodded, trying to read her reaction. Was she genuinely concerned, or planning to bury this? I'll need a few days, she continued. Continue your normal duties as if nothing has happened. I'll be in touch. The next 3 days were among the most stressful of my life. I maintained a facade of normal activity while watching for any sign that Olivia had alerted Vincent to my investigation. Every time my phone rang or someone appeared at my office door, I braced for bad news. But nothing happened. Vincent nodded cordially when we passed in the hallway. Linda consulted me about routine departmental matters. Everything seemed normal, suspiciously normal. On the afternoon of the third day, I received a calendar invitation from Olivia's assistant for a meeting the next morning in a conference room I'd never used before, located on the executive floor. The only other invitee was someone named Elizabeth Chen from an email address outside the company domain. I accepted without comment, though my mind raced with possibilities. Was Elizabeth a lawyer, an auditor, a board member? The answer was waiting for me when I arrived at the meeting. Elizabeth Chen introduced herself as Special Agent Chen from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Olivia gestured for me to sit. Maya, I've shared your report with Agent Chen. The FBI has apparently been investigating similar patterns at other companies where Vincent previously worked. Agent Chen nodded. Ms. Nguyen, your documentation has provided the connecting evidence we've been searching for. We believe Mr. Zhao has been running this same scheme at multiple corporations for over a decade. I felt a wave of vindication mixed with shock. So you already suspected him? We had circumstantial evidence linking him to financial irregularities at 3 other companies. Agent Chen explained. But we lacked the detailed paper trail you've provided here at Synergix. Your report effectively completes the puzzle. Olivia looked both grim and determined. We're cooperating fully with the investigation. The board has been briefed, with the exception of 2 members who had close ties to Vincent. What happens now? I asked. We're preparing to execute search warrants. Agent Chen said. Financial records, electronic communications, the works. We'll move quickly to prevent any evidence from disappearing. And Vincent? Olivia's expression hardened. He's being removed from his position effective today. The official story will be that he's taking a leave of absence for personal reasons. Only a small circle knows the real situation, and it needs to stay that way until the FBI completes its initial investigation. I nodded, understanding the need for discretion. What do you need from me? Continue exactly as you have been, Agent Chen advised. Any change in your behavior could alert associates we don't yet know about. We may need additional information as our investigation progresses, but for now, just maintain normalcy. As I left the meeting, I felt oddly calm. The machinery of justice was in motion, and my part, for the moment, was done. Over the next 2 weeks, the official story of Vincent's personal leave circulated through the company. Rumors abounded, but none came close to the truth. I maintained my routine, focusing on improving my department's operations and deliberately avoiding any appearance of interest in the Strategic Initiatives program. Then, on a Tuesday morning, everything changed. I arrived at work to find FBI agents in the lobby, escorting Vincent Zhao, in handcuffs, through a side exit to avoid the main entrance. Employees gathered in shocked clusters, whispering and speculating. An emergency all-hands meeting was called for 10 a.m. Olivia addressed the assembled staff with remarkable composure, explaining that Vincent had been arrested on charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. She assured everyone that Synergix was a victim in this situation and was cooperating fully with authorities. The aftermath was chaotic, but cathartic. As the details became public, it emerged that Vincent had been running similar schemes at multiple companies, stealing over $100 million over the course of his career. Several board members who had protected him resigned in disgrace. Martin, it turned out, had been a relatively minor player, implementing Vincent's directives in exchange for promotions and bonuses. In the midst of the upheaval, Olivia called me into her office once again. Maya, she said without preamble, I want you to take over as interim chief strategy officer. I stared at her in shock. Me? But I've only been a director for a few months. You've demonstrated exactly the qualities we need right now: integrity, analytical rigor, and moral courage. The board agrees. This company needs to rebuild its strategic function from the ground up, and you're the right person to lead that effort. The offer was stunning, a leap from director to C-suite in less than 6 months. But it wasn't just ambition that made me accept. It was the opportunity to rebuild something that had been corrupted, to create systems that would prevent such abuses in the future. I'd be honored, I said simply. The announcement went out that afternoon. The reactions from my colleagues ranged from stunned surprise to knowing nods. Raj sent me a text that simply read, "From IT guy to CSO's friend, my social capital is skyrocketing." Zoe stopped by my office as I was preparing to move to my new space on the executive floor. "Congratulations," she said. "Well deserved." "I couldn't have done it without your help," I acknowledged. "The information you provided was crucial." She smiled slightly. I'm just glad someone finally did something about Vincent. He's been poisoning this company for years. Would you be interested in heading up a new financial oversight division? I asked, reporting directly to me. Zoe looked surprised, then thoughtful. With actual authority to question suspicious transactions? Absolute authority. I confirmed. No more strategic black boxes. Then yes, she said decisively. I'm in. 3 months later, the dust had begun to settle. Vincent was awaiting trial. Martin had pleaded guilty to lesser charges in exchange for his testimony. And Synergix was implementing comprehensive governance reforms. I was settling into my role as CSO, working closely with Olivia and the new board members to rebuild the company's strategic planning functions on a foundation of transparency and accountability. The first major initiative under my leadership, a genuine one, with clear objectives and measurable outcomes, had just received unanimous board approval. As I left the boardroom after the vote, I passed the framed mission statement that hung in the executive hallway. Someone had added a small plaque beneath it, bearing a quote I recognized immediately. "The person with the most patience always wins." I smiled to myself. Justice had required patience, resilience, and strategic thinking, the very qualities I now aim to instill throughout the organization. Martin had taught me a valuable lesson, though not the one he intended. In the corporate world, true power comes not from taking credit or hoarding resources, but from building systems of integrity that outlast any individual. The sweet taste of revenge had evolved into something more satisfying, the knowledge that I had helped transform a corrupt system into something better. And that, I realized, was the most meaningful victory of all.